At 3:45 p.m. on December 5th, 1945, an emergency radio tower at Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale intercepted a signal that mathematically should not have existed. An elite combat flight instructor, carrying 2,500 hours of heavy flight time, was reporting that his instruments were completely dead. But it wasn't the mechanical failure that sent a chill through the tower operators. It was the veteran's description of the planet below him. Lieutenant Charles Taylor's voice broke through the static, stating,
"Both. My compasses are out. We cannot find the coast. Everything is wrong. Even the ocean looks strange."
He wasn't piloting a fragile, lightweight scout plane, and he wasn't flying alone. He was leading 4 other combat-ready war machines into a cloudless afternoon sky. They had maximum fuel reserves. They had thick structural armor. Yet, within 90 minutes of takeoff, an entire military system completely forgot how to find its way home. Pop culture has spent 80 years blaming this disappearance on supernatural geometry, the Bermuda Triangle. But the declassified files from the Navy Board of Inquiry reveal a terrifying reality, a total step-by-step collapse of human and technical systems, where every single safety backup became a weapon against survival. To understand how 5 aircraft evaporate from the face of the Earth simultaneously, we have to look past the myth and analyze the raw metrics of the flight crew. This was not a collection of panicked rookies. The aircraft were Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. These were absolute fortresses of the sky, heavy, rugged machines built to withstand direct anti-aircraft fire and brutal carrier landings in the Pacific theater. Each plane was packed with emergency survival gear, self-inflating life rafts, signaling mirrors, and water dye markers, designed to be visible from thousands of feet in the air. 4 of the planes were manned by trainee pilots who already possessed roughly 300 hours of individual flight time. But the lead aircraft, flight sign FT-28, was commanded by Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor. Taylor was an absolute professional. He had spent years navigating the featureless, trackingless waters of the Pacific Ocean during World War II. He knew exactly how to calculate wind drift, fuel consumption, and emergency vectors. At 2:10 p.m., the 5 bombers roared off the tarmac at NAS Fort Lauderdale. The mission was labeled Navigation Problem Number 1. It was a standard, routine triangular run designed to practice dead reckoning navigation and low-altitude bombing runs over the shallow shoals of the Bahamas. The weather was verified as clear and favorable. The flight was scheduled to last exactly 3 hours. The crews were ordered to be back on the ground well before dusk. But at 3:40 p.m., the precise architecture of the mission shattered. Ground stations did not receive a direct distress call. Instead, they began picking up internal radio crosstalk between the planes. The trainees weren't looking to their leader for navigation commands. They were listening to an instructor who was rapidly losing his grip on reality. The intercepted radio transcripts revealed that Lieutenant Taylor's internal compass had suffered a catastrophic psychological lock. He became convinced that his aircraft's mechanical compasses had failed simultaneously and were spinning backward. Taylor radioed his men.
"I don't know where we are. We must have gotten lost after that last turn."
A trainee pilot, recognizing the local landmarks below, radioed back a logical question.
If we just fly due west, We will hit the coast of Florida. Why don't we turn west?
Taylor's response left the ground operators paralyzed. He stated,
We are over the Keys. I know we are over the Keys. If we fly west, we will go deeper into the Gulf of Mexico.
this was the fatal pivot point of Flight 19. Through a phenomenon known as spatial disorientation, Taylor's mind had locked on to an entirely inverted premise. He believed he had miraculously miscalculated his speed and drifted hundreds of miles southwest into the Florida Keys. In reality, he was still exactly where he was supposed to be, out over the open Atlantic, because Taylor believed west meant death. He ordered the flight to turn east, deeper into the vast, unforgiving expanses of the Atlantic Ocean. And here, the rigid culture of military discipline transformed into a suicide pact. Protocol dictated that the trainees defer completely to the combat veteran. Even though several pilots suspected their leader was completely lost, they maintained strict formation hierarchy. They followed a blind commander straight into a geographical void. When 5 armored war machines and 14 men fly at high speed away from the continent, based entirely on a psychological error, the story ceases to be a simple human tragedy. It becomes a systemic nightmare. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the military tried desperately to intervene, but the technology of 1945 turned against them. Commercial radio stations along the Florida coast were operating on powerful civilian frequencies. As atmospheric conditions changed at twilight, these commercial signals began bleeding directly into the Navy's emergency tactical radio channel, 4805 kilocycles. The military's own communication lines were jammed with music and news broadcasts, drowning out the directional coordinates that could have saved Flight 19. And then, the institutional mystery deepened. At 7:27 p.m., the Navy launched its ultimate rescue asset, a massive Martin Mariner flying boat, carrying a specialized 13-man crew. Exactly 20 minutes after takeoff, that massive rescue plane blinked off the radar screens. No distress call, no wreckage, no floating debris, just an immediate, total deletion from the sky. When an entire squadron of combat aircraft, followed instantly by the very machine sent to rescue them, vanishes inside the exact same operational window, the military apparatus immediately begins to manipulate the public record. We are systematically tracking this specific institutional pattern of cover-ups across this entire channel series. If you want to analyze the raw, declassified radar logs and technical anomalies that the Pentagon fought to keep hidden from the public for decades, click the subscribe button right now. By joining our community, you ensure you will not miss our next investigation, where we expose how this identical communications blackout targeted a completely different fleet in these exact same coordinates. By 6 p.m., the weather, which had been pristine all afternoon, completely dissolved. A severe winter storm front slammed into the Atlantic, bringing blinding squalls, turbulent crosswinds, and massive 20-foot waves. Flight 19 was now flying in pitch black darkness, surrounded by freezing rain, with zero visibility, running entirely on fumes. The declassified transcripts capture the final harrowing minutes of internal communication. Ground operators could barely hear through the wall of civilian radio static, but they tracked Taylor's final decision. Realizing his fuel tanks were hitting absolute empty, Taylor instructed his pilots that when the first plane dropped below 10 gallons of fuel, They would all make a coordinated water landing together in the dark. An Avenger torpedo bomber weighs over 10,000 pounds. Landing a machine that heavy on 20-foot waves in pitch black darkness without instruments is not a landing. It is like driving a steel wall into concrete at 100 miles per hour. The aircraft would have broken apart instantly, sinking to the ocean floor within seconds. The cold water would have paralyzed the crew before they could ever deploy their life rafts. But what about the missing rescue asset? The vanishing of the Martin Mariner flying boat, call sign Training 49, is often used by mythologists to prove a supernatural force was at work. But the declassified maintenance logs tell a far more mechanical, devastating story. The Martin Mariner was a magnificent rescue machine, but it possessed a notorious, lethal design flaw. It was a flying gas tank. The plane's massive fuel lines routinely leaked high-octane aviation fumes directly into the unventilated crew cabin. Ground crews openly referred to these aircraft as flying bombs. At 7:50 p.m., the captain of the merchant oil tanker SS Gaines Mills logged an extraordinary observation. He testified that his watch crew saw a massive ball of fire erupt high in the sky, burning violently for 10 minutes before crashing into the ocean. The location matched Training 49's flight path perfectly. A single spark from a crew member's flashlight or a rogue electrical short in the cockpit had instantly ignited the built-up fuel vapors. The rescue plane hadn't vanished into another dimension. It had vaporized in midair. In the days following the disaster, the United States Navy launched the largest peacetime search operation in human history. For 5 days, 300 aircraft and a massive fleet of surface vessels combed over 300,000 square miles of ocean. They found absolutely nothing. No oil slicks, no floating flight jackets, no debris fields. The Atlantic had swallowed 27 men and 6 aircraft without leaving a single fingerprint. The disappearance created a massive cultural industry of myth-making. Writers invented stories of magnetic vortexes and alien abductions to satisfy the public's need for an explanation. But the true horror lies within the sterile pages of the official Navy records. The archives show that the state was far more interested in protecting its institutional reputation than delivering truth to the families of the lost. The Navy's immediate response was to lay the entire blame on a dead instructor. The 1945 board ruled that Lieutenant Charles Taylor was guilty of a mental aberration, claiming he single-handedly doomed his crew through stubborn incompetence. But Taylor's family refused to accept the character assassination. They forced a formal review of the declassified transcripts, exposing the broken compasses, the jammed military radio frequencies, and the systemic failure of the communication networks. In 1947, facing its own institutional negligence, the Navy officially capitulated and rewrote the permanent ledger. The official cause for the loss of 27 men was reduced to just 3 words: cause completely unknown.